December 18, 1942. A basement in Stalingrad. Temperature 6 degrees below zero. The darkness was not complete. A single candle stub burned in the corner, casting shadows that moved like living things across walls blackened by soot and blood. The flame wavered with each breath of 14 men who sat or lay in the cold beneath what had once been the Barrikady District Pharmaceutical Warehouse No. 7. Captain Friedrich Müller stood in the center of the basement, his breath visible in the frozen air. His uniform hung loose on a frame that had lost 20 kilograms since September. His hands, wrapped in strips of cloth that had once been someone's shirt, trembled from cold and hunger and something deeper than either. 14 men. All that remained from the original 183 who had entered Stalingrad 3 months earlier with the confident certainty of men who had conquered Poland, France, the Balkans. Who believed winter would find them in warm quarters beyond the Volga, the city secured, the campaign won. They had been wrong about everything. The basement measured 8 meters by 6. The walls were concrete. The ceiling showed cracks from artillery impacts above ground. A stairwell led up to what had been the ground floor. That floor no longer existed. Soviet shells had collapsed it 72 hours earlier, sealing the basement entrance with rubble. They had dug through. Found that outside was no better than inside. Soviet forces controlled every street within 400 meters. Every building. Every shell hole. The German lines were 8 kilometers west. Relief columns had been trying to reach this pocket for 6 days. Getting stopped. Pushed back. Destroyed. The men against the walls represented what was left of 3rd Company, 305th Infantry Regiment, 389th Infantry Division. 14 faces that had stopped showing surprise at death, at pain, at the impossibility of their situation. They watched Müller with eyes that had seen too much and expected nothing. Private Hans Weber sat with his back against the eastern wall. 21 years old. Looked 40. His left shoulder was wrapped in bandages that had once been white, now brown with dried blood and yellow with infection. The wound was 3 weeks old. A rifle bullet had entered below the collarbone, exited near the shoulder blade, shattered bone on both sides. It should have been treated in a field hospital. There were no field hospitals within reach. Corporal Ernst Hartmann occupied the corner nearest the candle. 33 years old. 3 children waiting in Dresden. Sophia aged 8. Klaus aged 6. Little Margaret aged 4. Their photographs were sewn into the lining of his coat. He touched that spot sometimes when he thought no one was watching. Hartmann's visible wounds were minor. Frostbite on 3 fingers. A shrapnel cut across his left cheek that had healed badly. His invisible wounds were the kind that came from writing letters home that described a different war than the one actually being fought. Sergeant Otto Klein lay on the concrete floor wrapped in 2 coats, neither his own. Both taken from dead men. Klein's wound was mortal and everyone knew it. Shrapnel from a mortar shell 4 days ago had torn through his abdomen. The entry wound was the size of a fist. Müller had packed it with cloth and hope. The hope had run out faster than the cloth. Klein was dying of infection. Of internal bleeding. Of being 38 years old in a basement in Stalingrad in December with a hole in his belly and no morphine left to ease the pain. The others arranged themselves along the remaining wall space. Lieutenant Franz Richter, second in command, who had graduated officer training school in July and arrived in Russia in August. 22 years old. Old enough to understand they were surrounded. Young enough to still believe rescue was possible. Corporal Johann Becker, whose brother had died at Rostov. Private Dieter Schmidt, who had severe frostbite in both feet and had not stood unaided in 2 weeks. Private Martin Vogel, who carried an unmailed letter to his mother in Hamburg in his breast pocket, rereading it every night by candlelight. Private Kurt Schneider. Corporal Peter Braun. Private Ludwig Meyer. Private Walter Stein. Private Joseph Kraus. Private Heinrich Wolf. Corporal Friedrich Lang. 14 names. 14 men who had survived when 169 others had not. Müller held a single piece of paper in his hand. A radio message received 30 minutes earlier. The paper was creased from being folded and unfolded. His fingers had left dark smudges on the edges. He had read it 11 times. The words had not changed. Relief column cannot reach your position. Luftwaffe will attempt supply drop tonight at 2100 hours. Designated coordinates. Grid reference 847 to 423. 2 containers only. Medical supplies and rations for 7 men, 5 days maximum. Acknowledge receipt. Müller had acknowledged. Then he had done the mathematics. 14 men. Supplies for 7. The drop zone was 300 meters away across open ground under Soviet observation. The containers would be heavy. It would take at least 10 men to carry them back. But only 7 could be sustained with what they contained. The choice was simple and impossible. 7 men would live for 5 more days. 7 men would die of starvation or wounds before relief arrived. If relief arrived. Private Hans Weber spoke first. 21 years old. Gunshot wound through the left shoulder, 3 weeks old, infected. He said what everyone was thinking. Who decides which 7? The question hung in the frozen air. Müller looked at each face. He knew their names, their hometowns, their families. He knew Weber had a pregnant wife in Hamburg. He knew Corporal Ernst Hartmann had 3 children. He knew Sergeant Otto Klein had survived Stalingrad since August without a single wound until shrapnel had torn through his abdomen 4 days ago. Lieutenant Franz Richter suggested drawing lots. He said it was the only fair way. Let fate decide. Not the officer. Not the strongest. Not the ones with families. Fate. Müller considered the suggestion. Military regulations provided no guidance for this situation. The Wehrmacht manual covered unit organization, tactical doctrine, supply management. It did not cover choosing which half of your men should live and which half should die. Corporal Johann Becker said his wounds were infected, said he was dying anyway, said he should not be included. Others argued. Weber said his shoulder was infected too. Klein said his abdominal wound was worse than anyone's. They were not arguing to be included. They were arguing to be excluded. Arguing for the right to die so others might live. Müller stopped the discussion. The decision was his responsibility, not theirs. He would make it, but he would make it fairly. He reached into his coat pocket, removed a silver Reichsmark. One side bore the German eagle, the other bore the denomination and year. He held the coin up so everyone could see it. He explained the method. All 14 men would be divided into pairs randomly. Each pair would flip. Eagle lives. Number dies. 7 rounds of flipping. 7 survivors. The men understood immediately. It removed human judgment. Removed favoritism. Removed the burden of choosing. The coin would decide. Pure chance. As random as the shell that had killed one man and spared the man standing next to him. As arbitrary as war itself. Private Wilhelm Fischer asked what happened if someone refused to flip. Müller's answer was immediate. Then that man dies. The other man in the pair lives. The process continues. No one refused. Müller wrote 14 names on scraps of paper torn from his message pad. Folded them. Placed them in his helmet. Shook the helmet. Drew 2 names. First pair, Weber and Hartmann. Weber with the infected shoulder. Hartmann with 3 children waiting in Dresden. The 2 men looked at each other across the basement. Weber 21 years old, married 8 months before deployment. Hartmann 33, father of 3. Both understanding that in the next 30 seconds, one would be condemned to death and one would be granted 5 more days of life. Neither spoke. What could be said? Good luck? May fate favor you? I hope you die instead of me? The other 12 men watched in complete silence. This was not entertainment. Not spectacle. This was mathematics made visible. Survival reduced to the spin of a coin. Müller held the Reichsmark between thumb and forefinger. The metal was cold. The coin was worn from use, from being carried in pockets through Poland, France, Russia. The eagle on one side was slightly flattened. The number on the other was scratched. These imperfections would not affect the outcome. The coin would land eagle or number with equal probability regardless of wear patterns. He looked at both men. Asked who would flip. Hartmann reached for the coin. His hand was steady despite the cold. Despite the circumstance. He had made the decision the moment the names were drawn. Better to control the action than to watch passively. Better to throw the coin yourself than to watch another man throw it. Weber nodded agreement. Did not reach for the coin. His shoulder wound made raising his arm difficult. And there was something else. An acceptance that Hartmann had children. Deserved the chance to try. Weber's child would not be born until March. Emma might already be a widow and not know it. Hartmann held the coin for 3 seconds. Looked at it. Silver Reichsmark. 1937 mint. Eagle on one side. Number 5 on the other. The most ordinary coin in Germany. The most important object in this basement. He tossed it. The coin spun in the dim light from the single candle. Rotated end over end. Rose to chest height. Began its descent. The rotation seemed slow. Every man in the basement could see the eagle appear, disappear, appear, disappear as the coin turned. It landed on the concrete floor with a sound like a small bell. Rolled on its edge. The rolling lasted longer than expected. The floor was not perfectly level. The coin curved slightly to the left as it rolled. Slowed. Wobbled. Settled. Eagle. Hartmann looked at the coin. The eagle was visible, facing left, wings spread. The answer was unambiguous. No chance of misinterpretation. Eagle. He looked at Weber. Weber nodded slowly. The movement was barely visible in the candlelight. He did not speak. Did not curse. Did not plead. Did not argue that the coin had been flipped incorrectly or had landed unfairly. He accepted the outcome with the same resignation he had accepted every other impossible thing that had happened in the last 3 months. He walked to the far corner of the basement. 14 paces. His boots made no sound on the concrete. He sat down with his back against the wall. Pulled his knees up. Rested his forehead on his knees. Turned his face away from the candle. Away from the other men. Away from the coin that had just killed him. The basement was silent except for breathing. Weber's shoulders did not shake. He did not cry. He simply sat in the corner waiting to die of starvation while other men ate. Müller drew 2 more names. Sergeant Otto Klein and Private Dieter Schmidt. Klein with the abdominal wound. Schmidt with severe frostbite in both feet. Klein was lying on the floor. He could not sit upright without pain that made vision go dark. The shrapnel wound in his abdomen had been bleeding internally for 4 days. Müller knew this. Everyone knew this. Klein was dying regardless of the coin flip. The question was whether he would die of the wound or die of starvation while the wound slowly killed him anyway. Schmidt sat against the wall near where Weber had positioned himself. His feet were wrapped in cloth strips. The frostbite was 3rd degree. Black tissue visible when the wrappings were changed. The feet would need amputation if he survived. But survival required food. Food required the coin landing correctly. Klein asked Schmidt to flip for him. Said he could not reach the coin from where he lay. Could not stand to throw it himself. This was not true. Klein could have reached the coin with effort. Could have thrown it lying down. But the request was something else. A kindness. Letting Schmidt control his own fate rather than watching Klein control it for him. Schmidt understood. He took the coin from Müller. Looked at Klein lying on the floor wrapped in dead men's coats. Looked at his own ruined feet. He flipped. The coin rose. Spun. Came down. Number. Schmidt lived. Klein died. Klein's reaction was different from Weber's. He smiled. A genuine smile, not forced. The expression looked strange on a face that had shown only pain for 4 days. He said he was tired of the cold. His voice was weak. The internal bleeding had left him pale and short of breath. He said he was tired of the pain. Tired of the smell of infection. Tired of lying on frozen concrete waiting for a relief column that never came. He said he was glad it was decided. Glad he did not have to eat food while watching others starve. Glad he did not have to choose between treating his wound or giving the medical supplies to someone who might survive. He said he was ready. Müller watched Klein struggle to his feet. It took 15 seconds in obvious agony. Klein leaned against the wall. Walked slowly to the far corner where Weber sat. Sat down beside him. The 2 men did not speak. Weber stared at the wall. Klein closed his eyes. 7 pairs to go. 5 men condemned. 9 still waiting. 3rd pair. Corporal Becker and Private Martin Vogel. Becker flipped. Eagle. Becker lived. Vogel died. Vogel did not move to the wall immediately. He asked if he could write a letter to his mother. Müller said there was no way to send it. The Soviet forces surrounded them. Vogel said he knew. He wanted to write it anyway. Müller gave him paper and a pencil. 4th pair. Private Kurt Schneider and Corporal Peter Braun. Schneider flipped. Number. Braun lived. Schneider died. 5th pair. Private Ludwig Meyer and Private Walter Stein. Meyer flipped. Eagle. Meyer lived. Stein died. 6th pair. Private Joseph Kraus and Private Heinrich Wolf. Kraus flipped. Number. Wolf lived. Kraus died. 7 pairs. 7 flips. 7 survivors. 7 dead men walking. The 7th pair was Lieutenant Richter and Corporal Friedrich Lang. Richter, who had suggested drawing lots. Lang, who had barely spoken since a mortar shell had killed his best friend 2 weeks earlier. Richter picked up the coin. Looked at it. Looked at Lang. Tossed it. The coin spun higher than the previous flips. Took longer to land. Seemed to hang in the air. It landed. Number. Lang lived. Richter died. Richter set the coin down carefully on the floor. Walked to where the other 6 condemned men sat against the wall. Sat down between Weber and Klein. They sat in silence. The 14 men remained in the basement for another hour. The ones who would live prepared for the supply retrieval. Checked their weapons. What little ammunition remained. The ones who would die sat against the wall. Some talked quietly. Others were silent. Vogel finished his letter to his mother. Folded it. Put it in his pocket. It would burn with his body or be looted by Soviet soldiers. It would never reach Hamburg. At 20:45 hours, Müller addressed the 7 survivors. The mission was simple. Reach the drop zone. Secure the containers. Return to the basement. The 7 condemned men would provide covering fire from the basement windows if Soviet forces engaged. After the supplies were retrieved, the 7 survivors would consume the rations and use the medical supplies. The 7 condemned would receive nothing. Private Fischer asked about sharing. Could the survivors split their rations with the condemned? Müller said no. The rations were calculated for 7 men for 5 days. Splitting them meant everyone would die. 7 survivors were better than 14 dead. Weber spoke from the wall. He said not to share. Said the ones who flipped eagle had won fairly. Said conscience should not override survival. The others against the wall agreed. Told the survivors to eat every bite. To use every bandage. To live. At 20:55 hours, the 7 survivors moved to the basement stairs. Müller was among them. His name had never been in the helmet. As commanding officer, he had excluded himself from the lottery. If there had been an odd number, he would have been the 8th man condemned. But there had been 14. 7 pairs. He had flipped eagle without flipping at all. The Luftwaffe drop came exactly on schedule. 2 containers. Parachutes visible against the night sky. They landed 300 meters north of the basement. Soviet forces opened fire immediately. Machine guns. Rifles. Mortars. The 7 survivors crossed the open ground in a running crouch. Müller led. Hartmann, Schmidt, Becker, Braun, Meyer and Wolf followed. They reached the containers under sustained fire. 2 wooden crates. 1 meter by half a meter each. Heavy. They carried them back. 3 men per crate. Müller providing covering fire. Soviet bullets cut through the air around them. Braun took a round through the calf. Kept running. They reached the basement at 2,114 hours. The 7 condemned men were at the windows, firing their last rounds at Soviet positions, providing suppression. When the survivors entered the basement with the crates, the condemned men stopped firing, returned to their wall. Müller opened the first crate. Medical supplies, bandages, sulfur powder, morphine, antiseptic, surgical instruments. Enough to treat the 7 survivors' wounds properly. He opened the second crate. Rations, canned meat, hard bread, chocolate, cigarettes, 7 packages, each labeled for 1 man for 5 days. The condemned men watched from the wall. Weber said something to Klein. Klein nodded. They were not asking for food, just talking, waiting. Müller distributed the rations. 1 package to each survivor. Told them to eat. They hesitated. Looked at the 7 men against the wall. Looked at the food in their hands. Hartmann opened his package first. Took out a piece of bread. Bit into it. The sound of chewing was loud in the silent basement. The others followed. They ate slowly, methodically, each bite deliberate. The condemned men watched. Did not look away. Did not ask for anything. After the meal, Müller treated the wounds. Cleaned Braun's new calf wound. Bandaged it properly. Cleaned Hartmann's shoulder infection. Applied sulfur powder. Fresh bandages. Did the same for Schmidt's frostbitten feet. 4 Meyer's hand wound. 4 Wolf's shrapnel injuries. The condemned men's wounds went untreated. Their infections continued spreading. Their frostbite deepened. Their pain increased. Müller did not offer them morphine. The morphine was for the survivors. That was the rule they had accepted when the coin flipped. December 19th. The survivors ate breakfast. Canned meat opened with careful precision. Hard bread divided into exact portions. Each survivor received 1/7 of the day's rations. The mathematics were simple now. 7 men. 5 days of food. Each man ate exactly 1/5 of his allotted supply each day. The condemned men did not eat. They sat against their wall and watched. Weber watched Hartmann eat. Watched the man who had flipped eagle raise bread to his mouth. Chew slowly. Swallow. Hartmann did not look at Weber while eating. Kept his eyes on the floor. Finished his portion in silence. Put the empty can in a pile with the other empty containers. Klein watched Schmidt eat. Schmidt with the blackened feet eating food that Klein would never taste again. Schmidt ate quickly. As if eating slowly would make it worse. As if speed would make the guilt less visible. Vogel watched Becker eat. Vogel, who had written his letter to his mother. Who had explained in 3 pages what war was like without revealing anything that would cause worry. The letter sat in his breast pocket. 3 pages that would burn with his body or be looted by Soviet soldiers who could not read German. At 0900 hours, Soviet artillery began shelling the factory district. The basement shook with each impact. Dust fell from the cracks in the ceiling. A near miss collapsed part of the wall above ground level. The rubble avalanched onto the pile already blocking the stairwell. No one was injured. The shelling lasted 40 minutes. 117 shells by Müller's count. He counted to have something to do other than watch 7 men eat while 7 men starved. At 10:30 the shelling stopped. The silence was louder than the explosions had been. In the silence they could hear breathing. Weber's breath was shallow and irregular. Klein's breathing was wet. A sound like drowning. The internal bleeding filling spaces it should not fill. Müller distributed medical supplies at 1100. Treated Braun's new calf wound from the supply retrieval mission. Cleaned it properly for the first time. Applied antiseptic that made Braun bite down hard but make no sound. Wrapped it in clean bandages. The wound would heal if infection did not set in. If relief arrived in 5 days. If Soviet forces did not overrun the basement before then. He treated Hartmann's shoulder infection. 3 weeks of neglect had turned it suppurative. Müller drained the wound. Hartmann's face went white but he did not move. Did not pull away. Müller applied sulfur powder. Wrapped it. Gave Hartmann morphine for the pain. He treated Schmidt's frostbitten feet. Removed the cloth strips carefully. The smell was immediate. Gangrene smell. Death smell. The tissue was black from toes to midfoot. Müller cleaned what could be cleaned. Applied antiseptic. Wrapped them in gauze from the supply drop. Told Schmidt the feet would need amputation when they reached a hospital. Schmidt nodded. Asked when that would be. Müller said 5 days if relief broke through. Schmidt asked what if relief did not come. Müller did not answer. He treated Meyer's hand wound. Wolf's shrapnel injuries. His own frostbite that had turned 3 fingers on his right hand insensitive to touch. The condemned men's wounds went untreated. Weber's shoulder infection spread. The red streaks extended down his arm now, visible through gaps in the bandages. His fever increased. By noon he was shivering despite the 2 coats he wore. Klein's abdominal wound continued bleeding internally. His skin turned gray. The color of concrete. The color of corpses in the street outside. He lay on the floor and breathed in short, sharp gasps. Vogel's wounds were minor. Frostbite in his ears. Cuts on his hands from handling barbed wire. Small things that would not kill him quickly. He would die of hunger. It would take longer. The light outside faded early. Winter darkness in Stalingrad came at 1,600 hours. The candle in the basement burned lower. No one had spare candles. When this one died they would sit in absolute darkness. At 1800, Müller allowed the survivors to eat their evening rations. Same portions as breakfast. Same careful mathematics. Same silence while condemned men watched. Weber did not watch this time. His fever had intensified. He lay on his side facing the wall, mumbling words no one could understand. Hartmann sat 20 feet away eating bread and trying not to hear. Night came. The temperature dropped. 6 degrees below zero became 12 below. The men pressed together for warmth. Survivors on one side of the basement. Condemned on the other. As if proximity to death was contagious. December 20th. Weber's shoulder infection had spread to his chest. He developed a high fever. Breathing became difficult. Each breath sounded like tearing cloth. He coughed blood onto the concrete. Dark blood. Old blood. Blood that had been inside too long. Klein's abdominal wound was gangrenous. The smell filled the basement. Sweet and rotten simultaneously. The smell of tissue dying while the body still lived. His skin had turned gray-yellow. His lips were blue. His breathing was the wet sound of lungs filling with fluid they should not contain. Richter's frostbite had turned his toes black. All 10 toes on both feet. He could not stand. Sat against the wall with his legs extended. Someone had given him a coat to put over his feet, trying to preserve warmth that was already gone. The survivors ate breakfast at 0800. Hartmann threw up after eating. The guilt made him physically ill. He vomited into the corner of the basement. Acid and bread and shame. Müller told him he had to keep eating. Had to maintain strength. 7 men surviving was better than 14 dying. Hartmann nodded. Ate his next meal. Kept it down through willpower. Schmidt sat with his back against the wall staring at his wrapped feet. Knowing they would need amputation. Knowing Klein's gangrene smell would soon be his own if the frostbite continued spreading. Knowing he was alive because a coin had landed number instead of eagle. The condemned men grew weaker through the day. Hunger accelerates all other processes. Infection spreads faster. Frostbite advances deeper. Blood loss becomes critical. Bodies already damaged by war consume themselves trying to stay alive. Weber stopped speaking coherently at 1100. The fever had reached his brain. He mumbled about Emma. About Sophie who would be born in March. About bicycle rides he would never give. About a future that had ended when a coin landed eagle. Klein stopped moving at 1400. Just lay on the floor breathing wetly. Each breath slower than the last. Eyes closed. Face gray. Dying one breath at a time. Vogel wrote another letter to his mother. His second draft. Trying to find words that explained what was happening without explaining anything. Describing the basement without mentioning the coin. Talking about weather and cold and hope for relief without mentioning that he was condemned to starve while other men ate 20 feet away. He folded the letter. Put it in his breast pocket with the first one. 2 versions of goodbye. Neither would ever arrive. But writing them gave him something to do other than feel his body consume itself. Night came again. Darker than the previous night because the candle had burned lower. Soon they would have no light at all. Just darkness and cold and the sound of men dying slowly in a basement in Stalingrad. December 21st. Weber died at 0430 hours. Klein died at 1115 hours. The fever. The gangrene. Starvation accelerating the process. The survivors moved the bodies to the far corner of the basement. Covered them with coats from dead soldiers outside. The 5 remaining condemned men did not react visibly. They had known death was coming. Had accepted it when the coin landed wrong. December 22nd. Schneider died. Stein died. Kraus died. 3 in one day. The cold. The hunger. The wounds. The basement now held 7 survivors and 5 corpses against the far wall. 2 condemned men still breathing. Vogel and Richter remained alive. Barely. Both were unconscious most of the time. Vogel's letter to his mother was still in his pocket. Richter's breathing was shallow and irregular. December 23rd. Relief forces broke through Soviet lines at 1400 hours. German tanks and infantry reached the pharmaceutical warehouse basement. Found 7 survivors and 7 dead. Müller reported the situation. Explained the coin toss. The choice. The consequences. Vogel was still alive when the relief forces arrived. Unconscious but breathing. The relief medics gave him water. Morphine. Tried to stabilize him. He died 30 minutes later without regaining consciousness. Richter was dead. Had died sometime during the night. No one had noticed the exact moment. The 7 survivors were evacuated. Transported to field hospitals behind German lines. Then to Germany as the Eastern Front collapsed. All 7 survived the war. But survival meant carrying December 18, 1942, for the rest of their lives. Hartmann returned to Dresden. Found his 3 children alive. Sophia now 9 years old. Klaus 7. Margaret 5. They had grown during his absence. Changed. Sophia had lost her front teeth. Klaus could read now. Margaret remembered him only from photographs. His wife noticed he had changed too. Noticed he did not eat at family meals the same way. Noticed he portioned his food exactly. Never took more than his share. Never wasted anything. She asked why once. He told her about Stalingrad. About a basement. About a coin. Told her once and never spoke of it again. At night he dreamed of Weber sitting against the wall watching him eat. In the dreams Weber did not accuse. Did not speak. Just watched. Hartmann would wake sweating despite winter cold. Would go to the kitchen. Would stand in the dark looking at food in the cupboard that he could not bring himself to eat. He attended church every Sunday until his death in 1989. Sat in the same pew. Listened to sermons about grace and forgiveness and divine mercy. Never took communion. When the pastor asked why, Hartmann said he was not worthy. Did not explain further. His children remembered him as distant. Kind but unreachable. Present but absent. He attended their school events. Their graduations. Their weddings. Smiled in photographs. But something was missing. Some essential warmth. Some capacity for joy that had frozen in a basement in December 1942. He died of cancer in East Germany at age 79. His last words, spoken to his wife, were in Russian. Net proidodenia. The doctors did not understand. His wife did. He had told her years ago that it was what Soviet soldiers shouted when they found German survivors in basements. No food here. It was the last thing many condemned men heard before dying. Schmidt lost both feet to frostbite despite the medical supplies. The gangrene had advanced too far. Field surgeons amputated below the knee. Both legs. He learned to walk on prosthetics. Learned to live as half the man he had been. He returned to Munich. Found work as an accountant. Could sit at a desk. Could calculate numbers. Could function in civilian life with mechanical legs and damaged conscience. He married in 1947. Had 2 children. Never told them about the war. Never mentioned Stalingrad. When they asked about his legs he said frostbite. Mentioned cold. Never mentioned Klein dying of gangrene while Schmidt received treatment. Never mentioned that Klein's wound was worse but Klein's coin had landed wrong. Schmidt kept a bottle of morphine in his desk drawer. Never used it. Just kept it there. His wife found it after his death in 1973. Found it with a note attached in Schmidt's handwriting. For Klein. Too late. His medical records from the war mentioned severe frostbite. Bilateral baloney amputation. Wounds healed successfully. They did not mention that he had survived because a coin landed number instead of eagle. Medical records document physical injuries. Not moral ones. Becker became a schoolteacher in West Berlin. Taught history to students who had not lived through the war. Who knew it only from textbooks and films. Who understood it as dates and battles and movements of armies across maps. He never taught about Stalingrad. When the curriculum required it, he assigned reading instead. Let students learn from books. Could not stand in front of a classroom and describe the city. Describe what it meant to be surrounded. What it meant to choose survival through mathematics. His students remembered him as quiet, gentle, patient. Never raised his voice. Never assigned cruel punishments. Treated every student with careful fairness. As if fairness was the most important principle in the universe. Retired in 1982 at age 61. Spent his retirement alone. Never married. No children. Lived in a small apartment with few possessions. Died in 1994. His funeral was attended by former students who remembered him fondly. Who spoke about his kindness. His dedication. His gentle manner. None mentioned that he flinched when coins dropped on hard floors. That he refused to flip coins for any reason. That when students suggested resolving disputes by coin toss, he would assign alternative methods with quiet insistence. Bronze calf wound healed completely. The bullet had passed through muscle without hitting bone or major blood vessels. With proper treatment from the supply drop, it closed cleanly. Left only a scar. He worked in the Hamburg shipyards until retirement. Helped rebuild the city destroyed by Allied bombing. Built container ships. Welded metal. Created things instead of destroying them. Married in 1948. Had 2 daughters. Taught them to value every meal. Never to waste food. Never to take abundance for granted. They did not understand why until they were adults. Why their father was so insistent. Why he became angry when they left food on plates. He told them about hunger once. Describe what it felt like to starve. To watch your body consume itself. To measure each calorie as survival. Did not mention watching other men starve while he ate. Did not mention why he knew hunger so intimately. His daughters found a silver Reichsmark in his belongings after his death in 1998. A single coin in a small wooden box. Nothing else in the box. No explanation. No note. Just a worn silver coin that meant nothing to them. They kept it because it had been their father's. Kept it in the wooden box. Put the box in a drawer. Forgot about it. The coin sat in darkness for years. Its significance lost. Just an old German coin among the miscellaneous possessions of a man who had carried survivor's guilt for 56 years. Müller became a priest. The decision surprised everyone who knew him before the war. He had not been religious. Had attended church irregularly. Had shown no particular devotion. But after Stalingrad, after the basement, after the coin, he entered seminary. Studied theology. Took vows. Served in a Frankfurt parish for 40 years. He heard thousands of confessions. Listened to people describe their sins. Their failings. Their guilt. Offered absolution according to church doctrine. Told them God forgave them. That they should forgive themselves. He never confessed the coin toss. Never knelt in a confessional booth and told another priest about December 18, 1942. About drawing lots. About eating while others starved. Never sought the absolution he offered to others. When asked once by a younger priest why he seemed burdened, Müller said some sins exist outside the framework of forgiveness. Said some actions are necessary and unforgivable simultaneously. Said God's mercy has limits and humans test them. The younger priest disagreed. Quoted scripture about infinite forgiveness. About grace. Müller listened politely. Changed nothing. Continued carrying weight he would not set down. Died in 2001. The Reichsmark was buried with him. His one request. The coin that had saved his life would accompany him in death. The funeral director did not understand. Placed the coin in the casket according to the will. Closed the lid. The coin descended into earth still showing eagle on one side and number on the other. Wolf moved to Cologne after the war. Worked in construction. Rebuilt the city the same way Braun rebuilt Hamburg. Different city. Same process. Same attempt to create something after years of destroying. He married twice. Both marriages failed. His first wife said he was emotionally absent. Present physically but gone in every other way. His second wife said the same thing in different words. Both loved him. Both could not reach him. He existed behind a wall neither could breach. Had no children. Worked until age 70. Died in 1987 at age 64. Heart attack. Sudden. No warning. Collapsed at a construction site while welding support beams for a new apartment building. His second wife found no personal papers after his death. No journals. No letters. No photographs from the war. He had destroyed everything or never kept anything. His entire wartime experience existed only in memory. When he died, it died with him. Except for the coin. Every survivor had the coin. Some kept the actual Reichsmark Müller had used. Others kept different coins that reminded them. Becker had a Reichsmark from 1937. Schmidt had one from 1938. Wolf had one from 1936. The specific year did not matter. The object mattered. The memory it contained. Müller returned to Stuttgart. Resumed his law practice. Became a judge in 1958. Presided over cases for 17 years. Civil disputes. Criminal trials. Legal matters that required weighing evidence and making decisions that affected people's lives. He was known for absolute fairness. For considering every detail before ruling. For showing no favoritism. For treating all parties with identical care. Defense attorneys and prosecutors said he was the most impartial judge in the district. What they did not know was that fairness had cost him everything. That he had learned in a basement in Stalingrad that being fair can be more terrible than being arbitrary. That equal treatment of unequal situations creates injustice. He retired in 1975. Died in 2005 at age 91. The last survivor. Outlived all 6 other men who had eaten while their comrades starved. His daughter found the Reichsmark among his effects. The actual coin. The same silver piece that had been flipped 7 times on December 18, 1942. Found it in a small wooden box with a note. December 18, 1942. Stalingrad. 14 became 7. She did not understand. Had never heard her father mention Stalingrad. Had never known he kept a coin from the war. Had never suspected he carried this weight every day for 63 years. She donated his papers to a military archive. Included the coin. Thought it might have historical value. Did not know it had decided who lived and who died. Did not know it had burdened 7 men for the rest of their lives. A researcher found the story in 2011. Cross-referenced Müller's unit records with Wehrmacht casualty reports. Found the names. Weber, Klein, Schneider, Stein, Kraus, Vogel, Richter. All listed as killed in action December 18 to 23, 1942. Stalingrad. Barrikady Factory District. Found no mention of a coin toss in official records. No radio messages about supply drops for 7 men. No reports of impossible choices. No documentation of the decision. Just casualty numbers. 7 names. 7 deaths. 7 anonymous statistics in a battle that killed hundreds of thousands. But the coin existed. Silver Reichsmark. 1937 mint. Scratch. 1. Held in a small wooden box for 63 years by a man who looked at it every December 18 and remembered. The researcher interviewed surviving family members. Hartmann's daughter remembered her father refused to flip coins. Schmidt's son remembered the morphine bottle in the desk. Becker's former students remembered his gentleness. Braun's daughters remembered the unexplained coin in the wooden box. Meyer's parish members remembered his burden. Wolf's second wife remembered his distance. 7 men who survived carried the coin in different ways. Some literally. Some metaphorically. All permanently.